Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. Before we introduce our guest, we want to give a shout out to our co-host, Corinne French.
Good morning. So glad to be here today.
Yes, very, very, very exciting. And we also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's giving hundreds of millions of dollars away to public education around the U.S. now, right? So started in Texas, but have now giving lots of funding away in the form of a free gift, zero out of pocket to school districts around the U.S. now. So if your district needs funding for higher teacher salaries or whatever your district may need, reach out to Ideal Impact. And now we want to introduce our guest, Dr. Mahler from Pryor Schools. Dr. Mahler, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you today.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so we're spreading the good word around public education. And before we jump into that, just want to ask you a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I was a lifelong, I guess, education candidate. My family has a long history of educators, and my grandmother and my mother were both educators. And at one time I thought, oh, I'm going to do something different. But I kept getting pulled in through a lot of different experiences, even in doing some coaching, peer coaching in high school, and then being a camp counselor. And I just realized that no, education was the place that I was meant to be. And so I did study education at Texas A&M and graduated from there with a degree in secondary education. And my areas of focus were history and English. And we always joke that the way that I was able to teach history in Texas without coaching football is that I found a position where they needed someone who could teach a few hours of English and a few hours of U.S. history. And that was the way that I got my foot in the door. So I began my career in Alief ISD, which is a suburban Houston district, and taught there for 6 years, and was also began as an instructional coach there. I was one of the first instructional coaches at Hastings High School when they began that program at the secondary level in Alief. So that was a great opportunity to work with teachers on their instructional practices. My husband grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and eventually we decided that we were going to move back to that area. We had young children and decided we wanted to be a little bit closer to family. So we moved back to the Tulsa area in 1997. And that was when I joined Jenks Public Schools, which is a suburban Tulsa district. And I started there as a classroom teacher. I taught U.S. history there, and then also started an instructional coaching program at the secondary level there in Jenks Public Schools. So had about 9 years of teaching and instructional coaching before moving into administration, and was able to serve as the academic principal at Jenks High School for a number of years, again, focusing on that side of instructional leadership through the administration piece, before moving into central office at Jenks, and served as assistant and associate superintendent at Jenks until 2021, when I moved to Pryor as the superintendent. So the majority of my career has been focused on the teaching and learning side, and it's been interesting to apply that knowledge to the larger scale of district operations here in Pryor.
Love it.
And
Wow. Go
I
ahead,
yeah,
Corinne.
I well, I it's always like who's gonna get the first question out of the so Gary and I are like who's gonna get the first one. I I love that you mentioned the history of educators in your family, and I always wonder, like, when someone is a teacher and like, do they tell their children, don't do this? Like, I'm in education, so I'm like, do something that has more money, like, but the value and the joy of being with students every day and being with leaders who lead is also like, that's just brings so much joy. But I want to clarify something just for our audience. What is instructional coaching? I think we say words a lot. I think we all know what a superintendent does mostly.
Mm-hmm.
But do you mind giving a quick little, like, what does that mean? Because
Sure.
I yeah, I
Right. So I've been really fortunate to work in 3 different districts that all place value on investing in instructional coaching. So I think this is a great question. And what happens is, we know that teaching is both an art and a science. And the role of the instructional coach is to work with teachers to improve really both sides of that piece, right? To bring in instructional practices that are research-based, and to help teachers grow their practice so that they are able to implement those best practices, as well as to make things their own and to help their classrooms function well. So we see instructional coaches who work quite a bit. Often we see our novice teachers coming in and needing some additional support in the classroom, especially as we see more and more of our novice teachers coming in without traditional teacher preparation. That role of the instructional coach, someone who's not an administrator, they're not an evaluator, they're there truly to help improve the practices that are going on in the classroom. And I think that removes some of the concern about sharing if you are having some struggles with someone, because you're not, that same person isn't going to turn around and be the evaluator later on. So that interim role between the classroom teacher and administration is a great place and a space where a lot of our expert teachers have the opportunity to share their knowledge with others and improve the district and school as a whole.
I love that. Thank you. I mean, I think that we get this idea of what happens in a school, and I think we forget that there is such a science behind it, and the teachers are learning just like the students. And so I love that we clarified that, because I think we don't ever want to assume that people understand what's happening with the science behind it. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and every district, not every district probably has that type of initiative. So that's a great idea for districts that are looking, to kind of explore other ways to, improve their staff and improve the quality of learning. So that's awesome. Curious. So, we always ask this question, but what are you passionate about in public ed right now? There's a lot going on. Just kind of it could be something happening in the district, or something, personally that you're just really passionate about in public ed. Just, go ahead.
So right now, I am truly passionate just about communicating the value of public education to the wider public, because we continue to see questions about what's happening in public education, and whether it is something that we should continue investing in as whether that's a state or the nation as a whole. And I always begin, when I talk to community members, and this is probably my U.S. history teaching background coming through all these years later, about how public education truly is the foundation of our democracy, that it was put in place in order to have well-educated citizens who could participate actively in a democratic government. And that is so foundational to what we're about as a country. So I talk a lot about that when I'm talking to community members. And I see, it's so interesting to me that we continue to see the surveys that show that people who have children in public schools continue to rate their schools well. When they're asked, how is your school, how is your child's school doing? They rate them well. But as a broader public, we continue to see some of that confidence in public education declining. And it's important for us as public schools to get out the word about all the great things that are happening and how we are serving such a diverse student body. That's something, I began teaching in 1991, and I've really seen over that fairly long career now, some of this shift in public opinion and some of the erosion in the trust of our public schools. And so as superintendent, that's one of the things that I want to be sure we are communicating in our district about how things are going, how we're doing, what we're doing, and making sure that we are continuing to develop that trust between the district and our community.
Yeah.
I'm curious. So go ahead, Gary.
No, I was just going to say that makes sense. I know some other districts that we're talking to, they're making an effort to share their stories even more with their communities. And obviously you are as well. You're on the podcast today, just talking about the amazing things that are happening at your district. And so yeah, just anyways, just want to make a comment on that. Go ahead, Corinne.
Yeah, well, and I think that was I was going to go that same direction. Like, what is it that y'all are doing at Pryor to let the community know? Because I think, well, first I want to say something. You mentioned Alief, and so we had the superintendent of Alief on a few months ago, and the Alief ISD was such a good partner to me over the years when I was a trustee. I came from a really small district, and I leaned on the larger districts and the board members from larger districts to idea share. And the same thing what you said about being evaluated, I could ask other board members questions that you might not want to ask maybe your current board or people in your community, because you don't want to show, in some ways you don't want to show weakness or whatever. And so it really is important to have someone who's a coach and someone who's guiding you along. And so I want to just give a little shout out to Alief ISD and a shout out to Tulsa. My first son was born in Tulsa. So tell me what you're doing. I understand that community. I love Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I love that surrounding area almost as much as I do the North Texas area. So tell me, what is it that you're doing there? And is there something special that you want to talk about that y'all are doing there?
Sure. Well, we are a relatively small school district, especially, and I know from working in Houston and being in Alief that in Houston, Alief is a smaller school district, but the 45,000 or so students is quite a bit larger than the 3,000 we have here in Pryor. So we're a small town district, and it really is truly, I always have trouble when you have to check that box on what kind of school district is your district in a survey. We really don't fit. It's almost always urban, suburban, and rural. And Pryor is truly kind of in between, and I would call us a small town school district. So we are about 45 minutes away from Tulsa, and it's far enough separated that it's not a suburban district. It's some of our community members certainly drive into Tulsa to work, but it's not. It doesn't feel like a part of the Tulsa metropolitan area. It's really a small town unto itself, and with that, it means that we have a lot of people who've lived here generationally and are raising their families where they were raised. And so there's already a good, strong relationship with the community in the district, which is such a benefit overall. And there is a good sense of trust already. We just want to build on that, and we want to be sure that we're communicating all of the different opportunities that are available for students in our district and what they can expect when they send their new pre-K. We have universal pre-K in Oklahoma, so many of our students start with us as 4-year-olds rather than as kindergartners. And we want everyone to know what they can expect moving forward from pre-K all the way through 12th grade. And recently, we have invested in a full-time position for communications and particularly our social media. That was something we, as a district our size, we had not had in the past. We'd had some part-time pieces, but that has been very helpful in increasing our presence on social media, as well as keeping our website really interactive and up to date. Our most recent focus has been to launch a focus on our core values. That's something that we went through a strategic planning process last year and realized that while we had these core values in place, we hadn't really put them out in any broad sense to the community. And so that's one of the things that we're working on a communication piece this year that I think is valuable and helps drive our message out to the community about what Pryor Public Schools is all about.
Very cool. So curious about that. So core values, that seems like it's so important. You kind of know, it kind of guides you in decision making and all kinds of things. What did that process look like as far as like coming up with core values?
Right. So we have had the core values in place for a number of years. And one of the things when I came in as a new superintendent and was looking at the kind of the district guiding document that we call the Tiger Tenets, were the Pryor Tigers. So the Tiger Tenets had been in place, and I wanted to both do a revamp without completely changing everything that had been in place. So we kept our vision, mission, and values from the previous Tiger Tenets document in place and then built on the other pillars of the strategic plan. So I was really kind of trying to also reinvigorate that discussion, since we didn't do a whole process to go through identifying those core values. We felt comfortable that the existing values were still our core values, and wanted to just get more discussion going around both internally and externally about those.
Love it.
I love the conversation about core values. I do that with my students, and I do it with, I review my own core values on a regular basis, because I think if we don't, I think it's hard to make decisions. And I think I think one thing that we talked about on the podcast before is that coming out of a global pandemic, I think we have the opportunity to make a change. Like, whatever might not have been working, like, this is still a good time. At some point, we won't be able to keep using that excuse or blame that. But I think right now it's a perfect opportunity for us to all look at our core values, and especially in light of what you're saying about if people are not looking at public education as the same value holistically, like if we talk about it, but then I will, as a parent, talk about it in a good way. What can we do to keep shining a good light on that? So we never ask questions to put our guests on the spot, but I think I want to ask you one. So you can answer this any way that you'd like. But what are some of your personal core values, and how have they helped keep you encouraged to keep doing this work in public education? Because it's been a hard couple of years.
Yes. So I would say that my core personal value really is integrity, and that at the end of the day, I always want to be able to know internally that I have made the right choices, I've made moral choices. And I think when you operate out of that center, then even in difficult times, if you know that you are doing the right thing, that you have made choices based on your own values, and then as a leader of the organization on the organization's values, then even if things are challenging, I think you can sleep at night knowing that you're operating from the right place.
Yeah, that makes sense, and especially in public ed, because you have so many stakeholders involved in, whether it be the community, the board, the staff, students. It's just, there's so many different. Yeah, when we get together for Thanksgiving at my house, we got there's so many different conflicting opinions there. I can't imagine, managing a district with all of those differences. So it makes sense how because if you don't have those core values that are guiding you, you're making decisions based off of, I guess, impulse or, pressures or whatever. But those core values can help kind of guide you in that. So that's not something I don't think we've heard that on a podcast, Corinne.
I think we talked about the mission and value, the mission statement of some schools, but I think to really talk about core values and to incorporate our own core value into that, I love that you said integrity. I think that we need to keep talking about that, because when we hear that that's what your core value is, it builds more trust with me, and I see you as a person, and not just this authority figure or this leader that's out there. Like, when you say integrity, I can say, okay, I can get in line with that. I might not always agree with you if I was on your board or whatever. There might be things that we might disagree with at times, but if I know that's your core value, I can say that's how she makes decisions, and you can get on board with that. So I think this is we probably should we should bring you back.
That's a question you can ask all your future guests now, right?
Yeah. Because in some instances, people may want to put public education in a box and say, but every district probably has, slightly different core values on what matters most to them.
And they should. I think in communities that are urban or rural, I think that's a really good point about the different values in a different community and different school. It's part of the beauty of a public school that we can still have that local control. We can say in this community, integrity is important. In this community, grit is important. This community, excellence is whatever word we want to put on it. And then how we carry that out. I think that's the beauty of public ed, in my opinion, is that local control.
Yeah. Yeah. You have that focus, and then, you can even have metrics attached to it. Yeah. That's very cool. Well, I know we're running short on time. Corinne, do you want to ask the last question, or you want me to?
Well, okay. I kind of would ask. Maybe we could do two last questions and go fast. I wonder if you have what you do with the idea of imposter syndrome. Do you ever deal with the fact of like, okay, this is really tough, and not just as a superintendent, just in general, and then what advice do you have for aspiring female superintendents? I'm studying women in leadership, and so I have to get that question out there. What one line or bit of encouragement do you have for any aspiring superintendent, but specifically female superintendents?
Right. So I think, one of the pieces of research that I've seen, and you may have run across it in your research as well, is that female superintendents tend to take on the superintendency later in life than male superintendents, and that I am a poster child for that research. So I was, certainly in leadership roles and some pretty high levels of responsibility at my previous district, but I wasn't the superintendent. And that honestly was in some degree intentional on my part, that I didn't seek out a superintendent role until after my children had left home. And that's because this job really is an all-encompassing job. And I would say to women who are aspiring to that, it's not, of course, and that doesn't mean you cannot do it when your children are younger, but I hope that if there are those who are looking and seeing that this isn't the right time for me, that time will likely still come. There's still going to be time to continue building your leadership experiences. My experiences as the associate superintendent in a larger district, where I would always say I was over anything that had to do with students except for getting them to school and home. So other than transportation, my role in Jinx encompassed all the student teaching and learning and student services. And that absolutely prepared me to step into this role when it was the right time for me to do that.
Thank you. I never want to cry. I always cry on this podcast. No fail. This time I brought a tissue, so I wouldn't. But thank you for saying that. I think that's really important for all of us, whatever our leadership journey is, to know that the timing is important. And if it's in the superintendent role, superintendents are my favorite people on the planet, my favorite leaders. It's a lifestyle. It truly is. And it sounds like you're doing an amazing job. And I really appreciate this time today. And I know our listeners are going to love this episode.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and thank you, Corinne, for being an amazing co-host as usual. And before we close out, we do want to give one last shout out to our sponsor, iDual Impact, who's giving hundreds of millions of dollars away to public education. So if your district needs funding in the form of a free gift, reach out to iDual Impact. And for those that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.